Hey everyone, welcome to The New Populist. I'm Dave Brown. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Now, I wanted to talk about Ukraine because there was so much ridiculous things being said, primarily by the neoliberal left that is advocating for this conflict with Russia. If you criticize it, or if you want a more peaceful solution, you're controlled by the Kremlin, you're a Putin puppet, and all sorts of ridiculous things are being said. And so I wanted to talk about it from a calmer perspective. Let's step back, let's not be goofy here, and really analyze things from the big picture. And to do this, we have to sort of step back and look at the three major superpowers here. And that, of course, is China, the United States, and Russia. Now, we're never going to have a direct conflict with one another as long as there are relatively sane people running these countries. And for the last 80 years since the invention of nuclear weapons, even in these communist countries that had a lot of turmoil, like the Soviet Union and the nascent Chinese communist country under Mao, there are people in those countries who did not want a nuclear war. Ultimately, even the craziest communists don't want nuclear annihilation for the world. So because of that, we don't have direct confrontations. We have proxy wars, where sometimes we do come into contact with each other's troops, like we did in Korea, where the Chinese were sending troops across the border to fight US forces. Or we just have our normal proxy wars, where we use other countries to fight smaller wars against each other for the advantage of one of us. And so when we look at Ukraine, this is again another proxy, we're all aware of that. And the question becomes, what rights do we have versus Russia in vying for this space there in Ukraine? And now, in the United States, we have the Monroe Doctrine. Basically, in the Americas, that is our sphere of influence. Everybody else stay out. And that's not unreasonable. But it seems that when we look at China and Russia, we don't expect them to apply the same principle. So we're involved with Taiwan and Hong Kong and backing up some of their movements. We're involved in Ukraine. We have been involved in Georgia. And of course, China and Russia, they too want control of their relative territorial areas. And I can't blame them. Now, what actually prevents Russia from invading Ukraine, from China invading Taiwan? What actually stops them? Because again, we're not going to militarily intervene to prevent that if those countries choose to do so. Now, if you look at it in a vacuum, what China would say to themselves is, what do we have to gain if we invade Taiwan? We can do it. But once we have it, is there any advantage to it? Advantage to us having it? Once we're in control of it, we become responsible for the people. We have to make sure their economy is still running. And so if that country is not an issue for you per se, there's nothing really to be gained by being in direct control of it. If you can control it indirectly, you might just leave it alone. And then secondly, and this is actually the bigger thing, what prevents Russia from invading Ukraine or China invading Taiwan is international pressure and the threat of economic reprisals. If the global consensus is that China should not invade Taiwan, and were they to do so, we would have some sanctions put on them from in Europe and the United States and other parts of Asia, then again, it's not worth it. So there is no military prevention of Russia invading Ukraine or China invading Taiwan. It's purely a calculation every country makes, every superpower makes, in deciding when to intervene in other countries. And for example, in the United States, we wanted to go into Cuba. Now, Cuba is in our sphere. In 1962, we wanted to get in there because of Castro, of course. What was stopping us? Russia wasn't really going to stop us. China's not going to stop us. No one's going to stop us. What actually stopped us? Well, we didn't have a good reason that we could go to the rest of the world and explain why we were there. So our Pentagon, being the smart guys they are, they said, how the hell did we get into Cuba? Ooh, I have an idea. Operation Northwoods. What we'll do is we'll have a terrorist attack against our own people, kill some Americans, and then blame it on the Cubans. Great idea. Let's ask the president. Now, thankfully, JFK is not a maniac, and he said no. But think about that. Our Pentagon wanted to kill Americans, blame the Cubans in order for us to invade Cuba. We needed a reason to invade Cuba that was plausible, that we can go to the rest of the world and say, this is why we did it. Now, why did we invade Afghanistan? 9/11. We had a reason. And then we piggybacked that with Iraq, with the weapons of mass destruction. And there was enough people that we could convince to go along with it to allow us to do it without economic reprisal from Europe and China and other countries. So every action we actually make militarily, we have to have some plausible reason that we can explain to the rest of the world why we're doing it. And the same thing is true for China and Russia. So what is the biggest thing here? How do we prevent those countries from expanding? It's not military. It is economics. As long as we have a strong enough economy, we can prevent those countries from doing things we don't want because they don't want to suffer the economic reprisals if the United States suspends trade with them or makes trade much more difficult. And that is the long-term issue with China. We have weakened our position over time because we've been greedy and short-sighted. And China right now isn't quite there yet. They're not there yet. But in the future, if they reach a point where they decide we can expand into these areas, and what we have to lose is not as much as we're going to gain, then we're going to go ahead and do it. And so the long-term strategy against China is not a military strategy, it's an economic strategy. And the same thing exists with the Soviet Union. Russia. As long as Russia has nothing to lose from going to Ukraine, nothing will stop them. But if they're trading with Europe, and specifically Germany with their gas lines, and they have something to lose, they won't do it. And that's where we have a weird situation with Europe, because some of these European powers, their position on Russia isn't quite what ours is. They're a little more ambivalent in their relationship with Russia, specifically Germany and their economic relationship with these gas lines. So we have to make sure that these European powers see things from our position, because if they don't, and unfortunately they're kind of shifting a little bit, if that tipping point is reached where the European powers don't care if Ukraine is invaded by Russia, and they won't try to cripple Russia economically if they do that action, then Russia might go into Ukraine. So there is no military strategy for Ukraine other than, again, we can give them some weapons. And then the calculus here for Russia is not that they can't beat Ukraine. It's, okay, they have a lot of weapons there, some good weapons. If we invade and Ukraine is serious about actually propelling us, even though they know they can't win, they might cause enough damage to not make it worth it. So that is Russia's calculus as far as looking at Ukraine. So all this tough talk about going to war with Russia and the potential for direct conflict, it's not going to happen. The closest we've gotten to a conflict with Russia as far as direct action is in Syria, where our forces are in close proximity. And there's a lot of, back and forth, but we're very careful not to actually directly engage one another. And even when Trump bombed that airport in Syria, we called the Russians and said, hey, make sure your people aren't here. We don't want to accidentally hit them. So we're always very careful never to directly hit Russian forces and vice versa, because neither side can afford a direct confrontation that escalates, and both of us being nuclear powers. So that's not going to happen. So why is the Biden administration making all this noise about Ukraine? Well, part of it is because this is the foreign policy establishment's whole thing they've done the last several decades with Ukraine and Georgia and Taiwan. They have their Rhodes Scholars, their deep thinkers, their think tank people coming up with their different ideas of how they're going to strategize and weaken China and Russia. Frankly, they've done a piss poor job of it, especially with China. And so they're always trying to come up with ways to antagonize Russia for these long-term geopolitical reasons. And the more obvious reason is that the domestic situation in the United States really sucks right now. And a distraction would be a good thing for the Biden administration, who has nothing to be happy about here in the United States, with job losses, with the inflation, no control of the pandemic, and a president who should be in a old folks home. No offense to older people. You all get old, it happens. He should be there and not in the Oval Office. We need somebody who has their full mental acuity in the White House. So all of this is noise. There is no war. We're not going to war. There's a lot of barking and a chance for our political class to distract and make noise. So don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to this channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.